This is Maren Jose and you're listening to merlianpodcast.com. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Hazel Courteney. Hazel Courteney was the UK's first alternative health advice columnist with her column What's the Alternative in the Daily Mail, and she soon became an acknowledged expert on health and metaphysical issues. In 1998 she underwent a near-death experience that triggered huge amounts of paranormal phenomena to occur in her presence. She tells this incredible story in her book, Divine Intervention, and the sequel, The Evidence for the Sixth Sense. Hazel is also well known for a number of very successful health books, including 500 of the most important health tips you'll ever need. Her latest book is entitled Countdown to Coherence, a spiritual journey toward a scientific theory of everything. Welcome to Merlian Podcast, Hazel. It's so nice to have you with us today.
It's very kind of you to ask me on.
Oh, we're thrilled. Now, today we're going to talk about your latest book, Countdown to Coherence, a spiritual journey toward a scientific theory of everything. I believe this is your third book on what you call spiritual science. You cover such a vast range of subjects, and also you've introduced us to some of the world's leading scientists. So if it's okay with you, can we start with your near-death experience in 1998?
Actually, yes, it's very appropriate in a sense that we do, because what happened was, it's actually 13 years ago tomorrow.
Really?
Because it happened over Easter of 1998. And I was a very busy journalist with the Sunday Times in London, going about my everyday business. And I walked into the turnstile in the bread hall at a very famous store called Harrods in London. And in those few seconds as I walked through the turnstile, it wouldn't go forward and it wouldn't go back. And it was as if this amazing release of energy flooded up my spine. I had tremendous chest pains and terrific pains in my head. And then suddenly the turnstile moved forward, and I went forward with quite a shock, and I thought, now what's going on? And within 2 or 3 seconds, I could hear a voice shouting in my head that I knew had not emanated from me, Hazel.
Mm.
And they managed to get me to my doctor within about 15 minutes, because obviously I thought I'd had a heart attack or something, and so did he. And they put me straight on the floor, they attached all the heart monitors, and whilst my doctor started to play my heartbeat down the phone to a cardiologist, I was blabbering farewell messages to my husband and my daughter, because anyone who's been through an intense near-death experience knows that in those final moments, it really does focus your mind on what's important, which is, of course, love. Anyway, I realized as the moments went on, I realized that I could actually feel what the doctor was thinking in his head. And I began to tell him what he was thinking and what the cardiologist was saying to him. And I'm really not sure, Marion, who was more shocked, whether it was him or me. Obviously, the cardiologist told him my heart was fine. Brian, my doctor, suggested I should go home and go straight to bed. He said he would call my husband, but he said he wasn't entirely sure what had happened. And when I got home, I was quite shocked, actually, because considering what I'd just been through, remember, like half an hour earlier, I thought I'd got minutes to live. I looked a lot younger, and my eyes had completely changed colour. And when my husband came home, obviously he sat in the bedroom and he said, "What on earth's the matter?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be really special."
Oh.
And he said, obviously he looked very, very alarmed. And he said, "What do you mean special?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be like Yuri Geller. I'm going to be able to do amazing things." I have no idea who said that. By the next day, I got a terrific fever, alternating with intense cold. I wasn't being allowed by something or someone to eat any physical food, which I adore.
Right.
My brain felt as though it was on fire. I felt, to be honest, Marion, as though I had been plugged into an ultimate supercomputer. It was as if anything I needed to know, in the moment I needed to know it, I could know.
Wow.
But the problem was, every time you ask a question in your mind, like, what on earth is going on, I would receive multiple answers in my head, but because I didn't know which one, if any, were correct.
Right.
And then there was this fantastic storm going on. I managed to get back in this amazing blizzard back up to where we lived in Birmingham. And by this time, the fever and the cold and the voices in my head and my eyes changing colour, the whole thing was starting to become quite shocking. And my next-door neighbour, who was terribly spiritual, in fact, it was she who started me on my spiritual journey, she suggested that I might have had what's known as a walk-in. And then another friend who was a doctor said they thought I was going through some kind of intense spiritual awakening, but they weren't sure what it was.
Wouldn't this be a Kundalini experience? It sounds like...
Oh, yeah, my Kundalini had blown in Harrods,
Yes.
but the trouble was I didn't know that.
Oh, of course.
I didn't even really know what a Kundalini was back in those days. I had no idea. But in other words, it had blown spontaneously in Harrods.
Mm.
And so as the weekend wore on Easter Saturday itself, with a medical doctor present, I kind of left this reality and moved on to another one. And I was on the ceiling of our bedroom thinking, Hazel still exists, but no longer in the physical body. And it took me a few seconds to realize that what was playing out below me was me in the bed. And as the weeks, obviously I came back, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you now. But I mean, I was doing and affecting incredible things. I mean, I saw people as beings of energy. I was, for a time, pretty much totally telepathic. And it really makes you realize, Marion, what comes out of people's mouths and what they're thinking are two entirely different things.
Oh, okay.
And at one point I was levitating. I was affecting and being affected by electrical equipment. I had hugely, hugely heightened senses for some considerable time. And then as time went on, I eventually got help from various spiritual people who explained that I had gone through a major spiritual emergency, which Stan Groff, of course, Stan and Christina Groff. Stan is one of the world's leading psychiatrists who studies altered states, and they coined the phrase spiritual emergency, which is when a spiritual awakening becomes a physical crisis, and mine was an enormous physical and mental crisis.
Absolutely. Now, this is so fascinating. That's why everybody should read this book. And a lot of people are beginning to have spontaneous experiences now. So do you...
They are, but I think it's really important for people to understand that they still remain fairly rare, but some people go through spontaneous Kundalini awakening, say, for instance, when they have tantric sex or at the intervention of an enlightened man or woman. But there are also an awful lot of kids out there who are doing crack, heroin, cannabis, and these drugs are triggering altered states. But the altered state is happening in a very immature consciousness.
I see.
And when your Kundalini blows like that and you are not prepared for it, I mean, nobody needs to go through what I went through.
That's why you did, because you have to help people.
I'm trying to encourage people to become coherent in their brain function, which is the basis, by the way, for enlightenment, in a very structured and slow way so that they can awaken their inherent capabilities slowly and then integrate them and learn the wisdom that you need to go with them.
That's very true. Do you think these young people are going to do that, though?
Well, no, I don't. And I think a lot of them end up in psychiatric wards. A lot of the psychiatrists have no idea what they're dealing with. But thankfully, some psychiatrists are now beginning to recognize altered states and altered states when it comes to spiritual emergency. Psychiatry manuals in the UK are now including the term spiritual emergency, which is a huge breakthrough.
Really?
Oh, yes. And so I think the more that doctors and everybody can become aware that we are far more than what we think we are.
Of course, that's true.
That we are mind, body, and spirit. And the more we can encourage people to understand that we are far more than just this tiny physical body, and that we all emanate from one source, and we have access to that source through structured practices like chanting, meditation, and so on, the sooner the world can become a more peaceful place.
I know. I read in your book about Gary Reynard. Is that how you pronounce his name, Reynard?
Yes, Gary Reynard. He's written a book called The Disappearance of the Universe.
He helped you, though, didn't he? You met him, of
Well,
course. And...
what happened was, it was amazing because I'd written 2 spiritual books. First of all, 10 years ago, I wrote the story of what happened to me. It's called Divine Intervention, because when I asked Spirit what they'd done to me, they said we call it Divine Intervention.
Oh.
And so that had been the title of the first book. Then, as a journalist, as you say, I wanted to find scientists who could explain what on earth had happened to me and how I was able for a time to effect what some people would call miracles. And that book went on to become the second book called The Evidence for the Sixth Sense, both of which have just been launched in America.
Oh, okay.
But then this book, I wanted to end the trilogy. But I went on, after I'd written the first 2, I thought, well, I'll go away now and just write a very grounded health book again, because obviously I was a health alternative writer previously to these experiences. And I was waiting, I knew I was meant to write this book, but I was waiting for inspiration and it never seemed to be forthcoming.
Mm.
And so I said a little prayer and I said to Spirit, I said, look, if I'm meant to write this next book, please can you show me the way? And within a week, Marion, I went for a massage at this place I never go. I booked in my married name at the last minute, and the girl who was massaging me had eyes like saucers, just like mine used to be.
Mm.
And I knew that this girl was like what I call cooking with gas. You know, she was fully online. And after she'd finished, I said, what's your name? I said, who are you? And we weren't talking about me, Hazel, you, Diana, or whatever her name was. And she said to me, she turned with these huge eyes, and she said, my name is Divine Intervention.
Oh, my goodness.
And that really blew me away. And she said, you are going in the wrong direction. And she said, if you want to go in the right direction, you've got to meet a man called Gary Renard.
Mm-hmm.
And he's written a book, it's a brilliant book called The Disappearance of the Universe. And Gary claims to have been visited for the last 18 years by 2 enlightened masters that appear physically to him, and they record the books that he writes. And I think, God, I wish somebody would do that for me. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway, 2 days later, after I'd started reading this book and after I'd met this girl, my ex-secretary sent me an email and said, Hazel, do you fancy going to a talk on Saturday in London? She said, there's this amazing chap coming in from London. And, of course, his name was Gary Renard.
Oh, amazing.
And so I knew, we have to listen to the signals, and that was pretty clear. So in the end, I went to Stockholm to interview Gary, and his theory from these enlightened people is that we exist inside of a holographic reality, that everything that ever was or will be has already happened, which I totally disagree with. And he said that we are emanating from an ego mind, and that once we can learn true forgiveness and let go of guilt, we can all merge back with the whole, and our universe will disappear.
Oh.
So when I heard all this, I thought, wow, that was very new stuff to me in that moment.
Yes.
And that's what set me on this journey. And I already knew that total brain coherence is the basis for what is known as true spiritual enlightenment. And this is when, Marion, when the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain and the whole brain becomes totally synchronized and acts as one coherent whole.
Right.
You and your Mother, Father, God literally become as one. After I'd met Gary, I was so fascinated. I thought, well, I don't feel like a hologram. I feel pretty real, and so does the rest of the world. So I got on a plane and I went to see your friend and my dear friend, Bill Tiller.
Oh, yes.
And when I visited Bill, I said to him, we were just having breakfast, and I said, Bill, what is God to you? And he said, Hazel, in the beginning, all things, all levels of reality were purely coherent. And he said, that means in science, everything was in phase. But he said, every now and again, he said, there can only be stability in a dynamic state of change. And so I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, this pure coherence, to grow in capability and knowledge through great eons of time, decoheres and recoheres. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. We're back to the word coherence again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to him, I said, well, so where are we at now? Where is humanity at now? And he said, well, we have decohered as far as consciousness can go. He said, we cannot fall any lower. And I thought, well, that's the truth, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And I said, well, where are we going now, Bill? He said, we're going through a change, and we're going to now head back towards home. And I said, do you mean we are going back to being pure coherent?
Mm.
And he said, you're exactly right. And of course that gave me then the title of the book, Countdown to Coherence.
Oh, I see. He's truly fascinating, Bill. I mean, he really knows the truth. He's a mystic as well as a physicist.
Well, it's just that he's been meditating for 50 years.
Yes, absolutely.
So as well as being one of the world's most brilliant physicists, having studied matter and consciousness for 50 years, he also meditates. He's also seen many of the miracles that, are associated with enlightenment. And so, Bill has a lot of detractors. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think I'm completely bonkers. But, in 1750, for instance, when the Admiralty in England knew that if the sailors took oranges and lemons on their ships with them, they would not get scurvy, it was 50 years before they made it law that ships couldn't leave port without the fruit.
Really?
So cutting-edge scientists like Bill and many others that I've interviewed are now sticking their heads above the parapet because they know that they are coming upon universal truths that can no longer be denied.
Absolutely. It's interesting also because you discussed this with Dr. Fred Travis, who's the head of the Center for Brain Consciousness and Cognition at the Maharishi University, and we're all fixated on the pineal gland, and you said that the thalamus is very important, and he tells you what happens when we meditate with that.
Absolutely. Well, it's actually now he's been elevated. He's now a full professor. It's Professor Travis now, so congratulations.
Terrific.
But the main thing is that everybody, as you say, has been very focused on the pineal gland, and people like Drumvala Melchizedek say that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. Well, maybe it is the seat of the soul, but mainly your pineal gland makes the hormone melatonin when you are asleep at night. When dark falls, you make more melatonin, which makes you more sleepy. But also, the pineal gland is the only single structure in the brain. In other words, every other part of the brain has two sides to it, like a left and a right side, whereas the pineal is just one single gland. But anyway, the point is that in Harrods, apparently as your brain grows in coherence, so if you were to meditate regularly, if you chant regularly and use sound and chanting, spinning, whatever it is, very slowly over time, the thalamus, which is an area in the center of the brain, which is linked to sight, touch, smell, hearing, in other words, the five senses, they start to turn up a lot more. So what happened was, that day in Harrods, as my Kundalini blew, it was like I'd hit the spiritual jackpot. So in that moment, my thalamus went from being pretty much asleep to being fully online awake. So I could smell more, I could hear more, I could see more. What happens is your senses become more heightened. You see the world through different eyes. Your intuition starts to wake up big time. And when the thalamus is fully online, and as I say, the whole brain is functioning as a synchronized whole, then you are a fully enlightened being, and they remain rare.
I'd say. I was going to ask you what enlightenment actually is.
Well, enlightenment is you and your Mother, Father, God becoming totally at one. In other words, there is no longer any separation between your ego, individual consciousness. So you, Merrin, would still be in a physical body and people would still call you Merrin, but you would talk as if you were God. I'll never forget, as long as I live, over Easter, I told you we had some amazing snowstorms, and my eyes were like big saucers, and I had this very wise voice coming out of my mouth, and I kept saying, look into my eyes and you'll know who I am. But I didn't know who the I was. And then when my mother-in-law arrived and she could see the state I was in, it was quite frightening, really, and she she was trying to lighten the conversation, and she said, "Oh, Hazel," she said, "what do you think about this strange weather?" And I turned to her and I said, "I am the weather."
You're everything.
And so, in other words, there is, when you are totally, and I'm not claiming to have been totally enlightened, I had a brief glimpse,
yes.
but I hadn't integrated it, had no idea of the training that would have needed to have gone into it. So I need to make that very clear. I'm only Hazel. But the point is, I had a glimpse of who we all really are.
Right.
So we're all part of God, and all parts make the whole. So when you have a fully enlightened, coherent man or woman, they have become self-realized. They know that they are part of God in a physical body. So they have access to some of the powers of God based upon their physiology, you know. So I had a glimpse. I mean, I really kind of figured out how spontaneous combustion works, because I was so full of energy, and I could feel that my energy field was hundreds of yards wide. And I became very aware of the inordinate power that I had access to, and I knew that I could use it for the light or for the dark. We can all choose. When I was in that very, very, very heightened state, I had access to enormous and very powerful and potent energies, and I knew that I could use those powers for the light or for the dark, and obviously I chose the light.
Yes.
In other words, for a time, I won the spiritual lottery, but true masters of the self have spent decades learning how to master complete mastery over their physical body, their emotional body, their mental body. And so these are not gifts that are bestowed and maintained and integrated, because as Bill said to me, true coherence is like sitting on a pinhead on the top of Mount Everest. And one day I would be having massive panic attacks, and the next day I'd be swinging into complete and utter and total bliss. So it's maintaining this state of being whilst remaining in a physical body, and that's the challenge for the rest of us.
I absolutely agree. Now, in your book, you say science can actually measure enlightenment.
But that's what I'm saying, that Travis and his team and many other centers, when you look at the brain waves
of coherence,
an enlightened man or woman, you can see that all areas of the brain are rising and falling together. In other words, they're all acting as one unit. And in fact, when someone is totally enlightenment, they start to use different circuits in the brain. And so therefore, the world is the same, but you see it through different eyes. I saw everything as being completely perfect. I didn't judge anything. Everything simply was. And so when you come from a state of total perfection, then all the chaos around you, as long as you're maintaining that sort of, it's like being in neutral.
Yes.
In other words, you have become a being that's purely at peace and okay with everything. And you radiate that coherence, and coherence is catching. So when you are in the presence of a truly enlightened man or woman, you feel total unconditional love. You might become a bit more psychic. You feel like you're being healed. You don't sweat the small stuff so much anymore. You're sleeping better. You feel better. And you do not want to leave that place.
Right.
And that's because you have entered a purely coherent energy field, and they are transmuting huge amounts of negative energy. So you are in what Tiller would call a sacred coherent space. For instance, the water crystals at Lourdes are fairly coherent. That's the work of Masaru Emoto. And as Bill said, the whole area, the whole environment of Lourdes has become like an intelligent, sacred space. In other words, by people going there and having sustained, focused intentions of healing and love, it wakes up the underlying latent energy that we exist inside of.
Yes.
The room that you are sitting in now is packed with latent potential energy. And the point being that most people they think of space as being empty space. It's anything but. we exist inside the mind of God.
Yes.
So therefore, every thought that you have adds to that mind. Every negative thought you send out, in essence, at a much higher level, at an ultimate level, you are sending out to yourself.
Absolutely.
So when we have tremendous moments of fear and panic for those poor people in Japan, obviously on a practical level we have to send money to the charities, we have to try and help those people, get them clothes, get them rehomed and so on and so forth. But as Sai Baba once said to me, he said, you can pray all you like, but he said those people need food.
Yes.
So better than just sitting thinking fearful thoughts, just keep sending out as many positive thoughts as you can all the time, because you are adding to the whole, and what we give out is what we get back.
Thank you for that. I was very happy, Hazel, to see a chapter of dialogue with the scientist and cosmologist, our dear friend Dr. Jude Currivan. She's a
saint.
I know. She has a vast knowledge on so many subjects, and she's experienced other worlds and her own spiritual awakening. What do you think you learned from just talking with her? Because she's so special.
Oh, my God, she's so full of light. Okay, from Jude, first of all, I asked her about, sacred geometry, and I asked her about 2012, because so many people are getting very worked up about that. And she said, Hazel, the 2 and the 1, 2012, is about the 2 becoming a 3. In other words, it's like mind, body, spirit. We're finally going to become whole. And one of the most fascinating things that she told me is, for instance, I've always known that the Great Pyramid at Giza is like, it's what's known as a Faraday cage. A Faraday cage is a copper cage that scientists may put a medium in to test them,
yes,
and no electromagnetic radiation can pass in or out of that copper cage. And the Great Pyramid at Giza is like a Faraday cage. The ancients knew about electromagnetic interference. And when you are inside the Great Pyramid or a similar structure, you can more easily couple with other levels or realities of being, other frequencies of being. And what happened was, Jude explained to me that as our magnetic poles are shifting, they're shifting by 40 kilometers a year, as the magnetic poles get ready for this shift, which happens about once every 750,000 years, so we're a few thousand years overdue, the whole world is becoming like a Faraday cage.
Oh.
So we have this magic window in time where we can more easily tune into the higher realms. The veils are lifting. And so this is why so many more people are starting to move through stargates, do all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But the most wonderful thing of all, to my mind, is that people like Tiller, Travis, Gary Schwartz, Alberto Velodo, Dr. Nihal Ledwith, Jude Currivan, and all these highly accredited scientists are saying, we're all saying it in a different way, but they're all saying essentially the same thing.
That's right.
And that's the miracle for me, because the only way that the vast majority of the population of this planet are going to take any of this stuff seriously and stop calling it snake oil is the fact that, once you have accredited scientists standing up, like Michio Kaku at New York State University, he heads up this wonderful program called The Universe.
Right.
These are really clever guys. And they're all saying, maybe they're saying it in different ways, but it's the same conclusion over and over and over again.
Wow. That's a wonderful, wonderful way you've said it, and it's so true, and I think people really are coming to this understanding. So many people are aware of this energy field changing, literally changing.
I know, but I think it's also crucial, and I know you'll agree, that obviously it can cause huge amounts of confusion in a mind and body that is not prepared for it.
That's right.
So the more we can look after our physical bodies, the more we can prepare mentally, and also when people awaken quickly, or when they're awakening with a tutor or whatever, their minds can be very pliable. So you have to be very careful as to who you choose as a teacher or where you choose to live, because a lot of these cults are very, very, very misinformed people coming from a very non-loving space. But they think they're right, and the same as I believe that I am on the right path, let's put it that way, because I try very hard not to judge people. But there is huge amounts of misinformation and confusion out there, and that's why, in the end, I ruined my career, in a sense, by writing these books, because I was no longer taken seriously as a health journalist because everybody thought I'd gone completely bonkers. But the more this science becomes available, they're thinking, maybe she's not bonkers.
Maybe she's not bonkers after all, and quite advanced.
That's it. I don't feel too bonkers. I feel very grounded.
Now, I wanted to ask you about Damanhur, because that's a whole amazing community, isn't it? And you went there.
I did. It's fascinating for people. I did a chapter on Damanhur. What it is, Merrin, this is a guy called Falco, which means the falcon, and he is a true alchemist, a real alchemist, and he's held his enlightenment, but he's a very humble man, very shy, keeps himself very quiet, but he came in knowing.
Right.
And when he was very young, he was able to levitate, he was able to travel in his mind and see inside buildings, and he could read people's minds and so on and so forth. And luckily, his parents were very awake people, and they started actually documenting experiments with their son. And he went on to, he says that he brought back plans from visiting Atlantis. Now, I'm just telling you this.
Right.
In his mind, and he visited Atlantis, and he brought back plans for these incredible underground temples, which took 16 years to build by hand. And they're north of Turin. In fact, I'm going there in 3 weeks' time again. And when you see these temples that are now being heralded as the eighth wonder of the world, they've got tons and tons of marble, amazing hieroglyphs, incredible doors like the ones that they would have perhaps used in the pyramids. They've got the largest Tiffany dome underground in the world. I mean, it's astonishing to see what they've achieved, and it's now open to the public if they want to make an appointment. They've got their own supermarkets, their own currency. They've got their own university where they teach spiritual physics. They've got the best behaved children I've ever come across.
Unbelievable.
They only eat organic food. It's a huge community. They've bought 80 houses in this valley outside Turin, and they've won many awards from the UN as being some of the best ecologically built houses in the world. And many people who are now building new cities, like they're going to have to do, say, in Japan,
yes,
will go to Damanhur as they're becoming the new template for a future way of sustainability and a future way of living. But the main thing is that, A, I learned quite a bit about time travel while I was there, but B, I realized that what these underground temples are is like a massive coupling device that helps you to couple to these other levels of reality. Like Bill Tiller tells you to couple with other levels of reality so that you can awaken to who you really are. You can meditate and tune into the space between your thoughts, and you create a sacred space, which is like, you clear the clutter from your mind, and you have this intention to tune into these other levels of reality. Well, it's much easier to do in the temples of Damanhur. And every member of the community, they all go about their jobs during the day, doctors, dentists, bakers, vineyards, supermarket staff, and they all work for the good of the whole. And all of them give several hours a month, free, obviously, to give back to their community. And in that way, they've built a very, very, very thriving, community within a community. So they pay both Italian taxes and they pay taxes into Damanhur. So it's like a little country within another country.
It sounds absolutely amazing, and like you say, a template for other communities to happen around the world.
Yeah, they've got a room there that's dedicated. It's like a massive healing machine that is supposed to have been channeled. And I've got quite a severe back problem, so I'm going there in 3 weeks' time to go and sit in this room with this mind-boggling machine and see if it can help me, because they have things there that I've never seen anywhere else in the world.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. So, Hazel, we've come to the end of the interview, sadly.
Oh.
I want to thank you so much. It's been such a great pleasure talking with you. I mean, you're fascinating, absolutely. And I say to everyone, they've just got to read the book.
All right, but the main thing to get over to people is when they look in the mirror tonight and they look into their eyes, know that you are part of God and all parts make the whole. You are a very, very special person.
Please, for our listeners, can you give us your website or websites?
Oh, yes, sorry. Back to the practicalities. www.hazelcourteney, all one word, COURTENEY.com. And all of my books are now available on Amazon.com in America, and they should be in most good bookshops. And I've also written a health encyclopedia, but all details of all the books are on my website.
Oh, Hazel, thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you for talking to me. You're a lovely lady.
Oh, so this is Maren Jose, and thank you for listening to MerlianPodcast.com.